Yeah, I guess we can just start by. I'll just ask you. What was your? I don't know. We're coming out of free agency. That was the most recent thing that happened. What was your biggest takeaway from free agency? What was the thing that happened that intrigued you the most?
I thought that lots of teams showed a lot of maturity so far this offseason. We're so used to like the Lakers and the Knicks and plenty of other teams just kind of going into star hunting mode and just kind of decimating their
Yeah,
futures or their presence or their team fit just because like a star becomes available. And so something that's really stood out for me this offseason and was like it was a trend that was happening during the season, especially with like the Knicks and Lakers both kind of like trying to build actual basketball teams that fit together. And I was like, look, they're doing it. They're doing this thing that their fan bases have kind of been begging them to do for like a decade. And I'm
yeah.
like, but maybe they'll both just like completely ruin that this offseason and do something insane. And neither of those teams have done that. And I don't feel too many teams have gone this route. So in terms of big trends, that's kind of like that's an encouraging one. It's like front office maturity. Not saying I agree with every single move that's been made, but like we're seeing there are a lot of them are at least kind of like come from a reasonable frame of mind.
Yeah, I guess the one exception to that is the Phoenix Suns, right? Because they made the
Hmm.
big splashy trade for Bradley Beal, and they ended up trading away a lot more than we thought. I mean, I'm looking at the trade here; it looks like a total of six second round picks as well as four first round swaps. So
Yeah.
no actual picks, no actual first round picks going out in that deal, but like still potentially quite a lot in terms of like value that you're
Yeah.
giving up for your third star in the roster. And a guy who at least temporarily decimated their depth, and they've been able to recover some of that during this offseason.
I think with Phoenix, because the Bradley Beal trade came so early amidst all the transactions, people have already got that analysis out of the way and have shifted to celebrating Phoenix for the cheap depth signings that they've been
Hmm.
able to make. And I do think that the guys that they've brought in, there's a lot of opportunity that some of those guys pop and become really meaningful rotation players. I think obviously the main thing that matters with um, the only thing that matters with Phoenix with any of these pickups is some number of those players becoming viable playoff rotation players. And
Yeah.
really nothing else matters. If some of these guys are just sort of good at helping them tread water in the regular season, I just don't think that for a team this all in, the only thing that matters is like, is Yuta Watanabe going to be like able to play 22 minutes consistently against multiple teams in the playoffs? Kind of like that's more the thinking I think with Phoenix.
They probably need one of their two backup bigs they signed, Chimezi Metu and Drew Eubanks. One of those two guys needs to be capable enough to give them 15 minutes a night or something.
Yeah.
And then they really need a couple of wings. I mean, they have Booker still, and they have Beal, so the guard rotation is pretty solid, I would say. But they need a wing who can like start and give you heavy minutes. Like they need the Torrey Craig from last year, who is no longer a Sun, but they need a guy like that. So maybe it's Yuta Watanabe, maybe it's Keita Bates Diop, and they signed a couple other guys, Eric Gordon as well, who could potentially give them that role that they need. But none of those guys are sure things. Like saw a lot of discourse online about Keita Bates Diop and how he had a pretty nice season with the Suns. He was a solid 3-point shooter for the first time in his career last year, even though it was on very low volume. And he's a big wing and relatively versatile on offense. So I
With the
mean,
Spurs last year.
yeah, with the Spurs last year,
Yeah.
but like it's on a tanking team, and it's not in the context of like a playoff environment. So like you never know completely whether that's going to translate or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like beggars can't be choosers. So and I think in that contact, like with how little, with the fact that they're just like they have no money to really offer anyone, I do think that the kinds of players they went after
Hmm.
were all smart choices. Like there's totally a world in which Keita Bates Diop pops. Like there's a lot of potential in there. Like for
Oh
him
yeah,
to be
it's a
exactly the
great
kind of
signing
player
for
they
the
need.
veterans minimum.
Yeah,
You're not
yeah,
going to
and
do
say
much better.
yeah, and if Utah can hit shots any like he did last year, that's also a perfect play. Even if he's not like, even if the shooting doesn't hold quite like it did last year, which I don't think is really possible. He shot over 100% on corner threes last year. He shot
Yeah.
120% on corner threes. But he's smart, he's hustly, he's really mobile, he can guard multiple positions. Like I think he's maybe my favorite signing
Hmm.
by them this off season, which I think a lot of people would be like, well, what about Eric Gordon? But I think you've got some Eric Gordon thoughts you can maybe jump in with
Yeah,
here.
Eric Gordon was really bad on the Clippers last year. I
Hmm.
mean, like I unfortunately watched pretty much that entire first round series between the Clippers and the Suns. It's like I don't know why, just events lined up where I was free to watch basketball when all those games were happening.
I'm
So
so sorry to hear that.
I got to see a decent amount of Eric Gordon
Hmm.
and a decent amount of Russell Westbrook, and like people are praising these players. And a decent amount of Nick Batum. But like all those Clippers role guys, for the most part, just like really, really struggled. And it could have been a system wide thing. It could have been a team chemistry thing. Like I don't know. Like these things happen where a team is just like really down in the dumps for whatever reason, and people aren't really playing well, and they can bounce back. But I guess with Eric Gordon, there are definitely some like mobility issues. Some like he was having to rely on some pretty deep pull up threes to just get an open shot off because he kind of has that low release and he's not super tall. And when you start to lose a little bit of quickness, I think that all adds up to declines in someone's game. So I'm not hugely jazzed about the Eric Gordon signing, but like yeah, the other two wings that they signed are I think more promising when it comes to like a playoff rotation player.
I think with Eric Gordon and this type of player, when you're a really good veteran that has been stuck on a bad team for years, I think for a lot of NBA media and fans, in their minds they like put that player on ice and think, okay, now I'm taking that player out of the
Yeah,
freezer, and
I'm getting
and
31-year-old Eric Gordon.
yeah, like, oh, I saw him in the playoffs, like, back in 2020, and he was like, still capable of giving you 17 points per game and shooting some threes and having a bit of defensive versatility because he had, like, not great foot speed for a guard back then, but he's so strong and wide that he
And
can
has
guard
those,
up
yeah,
really
he's really
well.
long arms too.
Yeah, Houston back in the day had that, like, kind of one of the sneaky things that was special about that team was just like how thick and strong they were between Harden, Gordon, and PJ Tucker. And when they employed that switching offense, it was just really hard to get anything in traditional ways against that team. But that was like, that's a long time ago. Yeah, you're right. Like, Gordon was 31 years old. And sometimes when you put something in the freezer and think it's just going to be fresh when you take it out, like 6 months later or several years
There's some
later.
freezer burn on there.
Yeah. And Gordon clearly showed in that Clippers series that, like, he can't scale up. And he got big minutes in the playoffs. He played 30 minutes a game.
Yeah.
Um, and was not able to contribute offensively or defensively. Like, I think if he's like, if his role is scaled down to spot up 3-point shooter who isn't a complete total have to hide me on defense, I think that's a possibility, but I think that represents the high end of what you get for Eric Gordon in his age 35 season. Like, and I love Eric Gordon. I think it's like, I love the bounce back of his career after all those like early injuries. He looked like
Yeah.
he was going to be one of the best shooting guards in the NBA, and then he kind of, all those injuries happened in started with the Clippers and then kind of kept going through New Orleans. And he kind of quietly bounced back as like I can give you sneaky, like, star level offensive production in a only slightly reduced role. But yeah, again, that's a long time ago. He's 35, and when you're excited about a 35-year-old, like, ask Philly how they felt about PJ Tucker last year. Like, it happens every offseason where, like, oh, this big name is going to change things for a contender. It's like, they might, but don't count on it.
Yeah, but I think ultimately with the Suns, like when they initially traded for Bradley Beal, I was more skeptical about are they gonna more so defensively than offensively. Like offensively, they'll be okay. I do think the main problem with them offensively is like, yeah, you have three awesome shot creators, but all three of these guys love to operate in the mid range and love to create offense for themselves. So while the offense is very good, I don't know if it'll quite be explosive.
Yeah,
That's
I
kind of what we
agree with
saw
that.
against the Nuggets last year. Like in the playoffs, is when Katie and Booker are on one, their offense is very very good. It's a high level, but I don't know if it quite reaches that like pinnacle top tier, like peak Warriors offense, right? Um,
No,
just due to the nature of they don't quite have that same level of playmaking and shot generation for others.
I think they sleepwalk into a top 10 offense, but it will be a struggle to turn that into a top 5 offense. Is how I feel
Yeah.
about Phoenix. I do think people sleep a little bit on Bradley Beal's driving ability. Again, we haven't seen Bradley Beal play real meaningful basketball a whole lot. And again, just like
It's been a
even
while, yeah.
yeah, I mean, even like the Wizards were never that bad or were rarely that bad, but I feel like they're also one of the least watched teams in the NBA. Like if you
Mhm.
for anyone who watches all kind like any like super fan out there that is watching more than just their team, if they made the list of teams they watch regularly, I would don't think the Wizards are going to be on very many lists.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm speaking like from my biased personal perspective, like the Wizards have been maybe in 30th place on teams that I'm intrigued to watch. So I kind of see I've only seen them by accident in a couple of years. So I don't want to go too deep. I'm kind of actually excited to see Bradley Beal again. Like, oh, I'll be watching you somewhat regularly for the first time in a little bit. So let's see if you still got that. But the driving numbers are good. And I think that's going to be really important for them as someone who actually is going to put the ball on the floor and attack and kind of start things off for them. But it's definitely a team that lacks high end passing. It's definitely the bigger concern for me is that like Vogel has like really impressed with his ability to construct defenses without great wing defense. He's like, give me a couple of solid point of attack guys and some size, and I will,
Hmm.
crush. I will crush our opponents. But this team has neither of those things, so it'll be very
No, yeah,
fascinating
not a
to see
lot of
what Vogel
size.
does defensively.
They
Because if
have
they
wing
can keep,
defenders.
yeah,
Ironically, that's
yeah,
kind of what Kevin Durant's. I would say fairly handily their best defensive player, as long as he can stay healthy.
yeah, that's yeah, is he? What who else is on?
Well, maybe I'm underrating Josh Kogi a little bit.
Oh, Josikochi is better than. I mean, he's a better point of attack defender, and I think he'll
Yeah.
probably. I think Vogel that will be Vogel's guy. Like he
So they
loves.
have two, like at least two high end defenders. Aiton, it kind of depends a little bit. Like Aiton's solid when he's in position and engaged, but he tends to float a little bit on defense and not always be
I don't
completely
think
perfect.
that Durant looked good at all in the playoffs on defense. I know he's been good in his career, and he was good last year before his injury, but he so often against Denver looked like an old creaky man. Like just he'd get physical with like Aaron Gordon. All of a sudden, he just kind of like toppling over like this tall, skinny statue. And obviously,
Mhm.
Gordon's a tough matchup for him, but it still was like Boston was able to really just like, oh, we're like the year before was like we're so much quicker than you. We can beat you to spots. Like,
Yeah.
so he
I
was,
guess I guess we'll see if we get a fully healthy season out of Kevin Durant. Maybe that's asking too much. Um,
yeah,
but if Kevin Durant plays like 65 games and is coming into the playoffs, not coming off of an injury, I
yeah,
suspect we might see a slightly better defensive version of Kevin Durant. But I guess the one thing I'll say in summary about the Suns offseason is I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I'm not bullish on it because I don't know for sure if the moves that they made to fill out the roster are going to give them enough to have like a really solid 8 to 9 man rotation in the playoffs.
yeah,
But they gave themselves a chance at one, whereas prior, like
totally.
immediately following the Bradley Beal trade, I wasn't sure if they would get there. Um,
Yeah.
so
So, yeah, I agree with that completely. I think they've given themselves a chance at a playoff rotation. We'll see if it happens. I feel like they've got a good three out of five chance or 50-50 chance. I don't know,
yeah,
something like that. I like the moves. They might pop. No one should be that surprised though if just like all of these guys look extremely unexceptional and Phoenix by the time the playoff comes around and Phoenix feels like a team that runs 3 or 4 deep and everyone scapegoats DeAndre Ayton.